The moment she stood up, the room had already decided she'd fail. They didn't need to hear her voice. They'd already dismissed it. Whispers curled through the air like smoke, and the shuffle of papers barely covered the snickers. A boy in the second row smirked. Someone in the back said, "Oh no, here we go," loud enough for her to hear. Naima clutched her paper like it was a shield. She walked to the front. Not fast, not slow, just steady, just brave enough not to turn around. Her voice had never been loud. Not the way teachers liked, not the way kids noticed. But today, it wasn't just a school assignment. Today was the first time she'd try to be heard. She looked down at her notes, folded, creased, rehearsed 100 times in front of a bathroom mirror. Her mother had listened through the door, whispering encouragement she couldn't say aloud. "You got this, baby. Just breathe." Naima took a breath. "My presentation is about—" "Can you speak up?" The interruption sliced through her sentence like glass. Mr. Dorsey didn't even look up from his desk. She glanced around. A few students laughed. One mimicked her quietly. Naima swallowed. "My presentation is about—" "Louder," Mr. Dorsey snapped. "They can't hear you in the hallway." Laughter. Louder now. She tried again, voice cracking under pressure. "That's it," he sighed, standing. "If you're not ready to be heard, don't waste our time." He gestured toward her desk. "Sit down." For a moment, she didn't move. Not out of defiance, out of shock. Because no one had ever shut her down so publicly, so easily. When she turned to walk back, the words from the front row hit like stones. Why'd she even try? Mute girl strikes again. Thought she'd pass out. Her seat felt colder than before, smaller, and though she kept her face still, her hands shook under the desk. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She didn't breathe. But something in her shifted. A voice didn't die that day. It started forming teeth. The silence didn't begin all at once. It crept in slowly, like fog. First around her voice, then her hands, then her eyes. She stopped raising her hand in class. Not that she had done it often. She stopped joining group projects, though no one ever asked her to. She still came to school every day, still walked the same halls, still ate her lunch at the same table near the vending machines, alone. But her voice, it stayed home. The other kids barely noticed. Teachers wrote notes. Withdrawn. One counselor called her mother. Maybe she needs confidence training, she suggested, as if Naima were a broken device waiting for a software update. What no one asked was, what broke her in the first place? At home, Naima said she was tired. Her mother, who worked 2 jobs and carried her own invisible bruises, nodded with soft understanding. She's just shy, she told herself. She'll bounce back. But Naima wasn't shy. She was burning. Late at night, long after the neighborhood hushed, Naima would sit on her bed with the lights off. She'd replay the classroom in her head like a horror film she couldn't look away from. Mr. Dorsey's voice, the laughter, her own trembling breath. And then, silence. Again. But not the kind that hurts. The kind that listens. She began to notice things. The way people interrupted each other. The words they used when they didn't think anyone was paying attention. The way her classmates mocked others just loud enough to get a reaction, but not loud enough to be punished. She listened, and the more she listened, the more she learned. About power, about fear, about how silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's a trap being set. One afternoon, weeks later, as Naima sat curled up in the farthest corner of the library, something shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But from behind a shelf, she heard a voice. Not mocking, not cruel, strong, focused. It was a girl her age, maybe a year older, practicing a speech, repeating it, emphasizing every word like it mattered. Naima peeked through the gap in the books. The girl stood alone, talking to no one. just rehearsing, fiercely, like her words were weapons. Naima didn't know what she was watching, but she couldn't look away. Not because the voice was powerful, not because the message was bold, but because something in that cadence, in that fight, in that hunger, felt familiar. And Naima didn't realize it yet, but that moment, hidden behind library books and unspoken thoughts, was the first crack in the wall she had built around her voice. She would still be silent for a while longer, but soon she'd find a reason to speak again. And when she did, they would all remember what silence sounds like, just before a storm. Naima didn't mean to return to that corner of the library, but once something stirs inside you, really stirs, you start drifting toward it, like gravity knows more than you do. The next day, she went back, not with a plan, not with courage, just a pull. She carried a book she didn't plan to read, walked past the rows of encyclopedias no one touched anymore, and slid into the same chair near the tall wooden shelves, 2 aisles over from the back wall where the sun never fully reached. She waited, and she listened. At first, nothing. Just the usual library hush, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights, a few pages turning, a cough, a whisper, and then, "I believe," the voice said, "that words are not just sounds, they are choices." It was her, the same girl from yesterday, still practicing, still alone, but this time, the words carried more than rhythm. They carried fire. Naima sat very still. "I believe," the girl continued, "that silence can be as violent as a fist. That indifference is the worst kind of cruelty, and that when we speak, we become dangerous." Naima closed her eyes. Dangerous. She tasted the word in her mind. It didn't feel sharp. It felt warm, like something buried inside her had finally exhaled. That girl, whoever she was, spoke like she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't reading from a script. She wasn't faking power. She was power. Naima didn't even notice the moment she began mouthing the words with her, quietly, barely moving her lips. And when the girl paused between sentences, Naima found herself anticipating the next line, like music she had already memorized without knowing. It felt like flying without leaving the ground. It felt like speaking, without being heard. But just as she was leaning forward, breath caught in her throat. "Hey!" Naima flinched. The girl had stepped out from the aisle. She had short braids, strong posture, and a notebook full of hand-scribbled lines. She looked directly at Naima. "You spying on me?" she asked, not unkindly. Naima opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The girl tilted her head. "You okay?" Naima nodded. "Cool," the girl said, adjusting her backpack. "We're holding open tryouts for debate club. Tuesday, room 3B. She didn't wait for a response. She just walked away, notebook in hand, chin high, like she had somewhere to be, and belonged there. Naima sat frozen. Not because she was afraid, but because the moment had left a mark, a small, invisible bruise in the shape of hope. Room 3B, Tuesday. She whispered it to herself like a code, and for the first time in weeks, she wanted to go somewhere. She didn't know if she would, but part of her already had. Room 3B smelled like markers and old tension. Naima stood outside the door for a full 2 minutes before opening it. She'd walked past it twice already, pretending to head somewhere else. But now, here she was, heart pounding, hands cold, voice still somewhere far away. She pushed the door open. Inside, 6 students sat around a scratched-up table, papers scattered, half-empty soda cans dotting the surface like lazy landmines. At the whiteboard, that same girl from the library paced with a marker in her hand. The girl looked up, and for a moment, no one said anything. "Then, you lost?" A boy near the door asked it, not mean exactly, but with that lazy smirk that made it worse. Naima shook her head. "I'm here. For tryouts," she said. "Barely." The room didn't explode in laughter, but it might as well have. One girl raised an eyebrow. Another looked her up and down like checking for a barcode. Seriously? You don't talk in class, but you want to debate? She's the mute one from English, right? Naima's cheeks flared hot. The girl from the library, Jada she'd later learn, held up a hand. Chill, she said. Everyone starts somewhere. The others shrugged, turned back to their notes. Jada pointed to a chair in the corner. Sit. Watch. Then we'll see. Naima obeyed, grateful, embarrassed, confused. For the next hour, she watched and learned. The words weren't just arguments, they were weapons. Timing was everything. Eye contact was strategy. Confidence wasn't a feeling, it was performance. They weren't just talking, they were fighting, and they were good. Jada was the best. When she spoke, people stopped typing. When she paused, even the air leaned forward. Naima didn't understand half the references, but she understood rhythm. She understood fire. When the session ended, students grabbed their bags, still buzzing with adrenaline. No one looked at her. Except Jada. You got a name? She asked. Naima. Cool. See you Thursday. Naima blinked. I thought this was just today. Jada grinned. Girl, debate is every week. You're not a guest anymore. Naima stood there for a beat, trying to understand what had just happened. She hadn't spoken. She hadn't debated. She hadn't proved anything. But someone had seen her. Not as a punchline, not as a shadow, as a maybe. And sometimes, maybe, is enough to build a future on. They never asked her to speak. At each meeting, they gave her the stopwatch. Her job was to keep time, press start, press stop, and stay quiet in between. She sat in the corner, next to the outlet that didn't work, her notebook unopened on her lap. She smiled when they made jokes. She nodded when they argued. But her voice, still nowhere in the room. Some of them forgot her name. Others didn't even try to learn it. To them, she was the girl who sits over there. But what they didn't know was this. Naima spoke every night. Not to them, not to anyone, just to herself. She would close the door to her room, prop up her cracked phone against an empty water bottle, and hit record. At first, it was unbearable. She hated her voice. Too soft, too shaky, too not enough. She'd watch herself stumble, mumble, freeze, delete, try again, repeat. But slowly something began to shift. She started standing up straighter. She looked herself in the eye longer. She held the silences, controlled the breath, aimed the words like arrows. She wasn't just practicing debate. She was reclaiming something. Each sentence she repeated wasn't just memorization. It was armor. Each pause was precision. Each emphasis was healing. Sometimes she'd whisper. Sometimes she'd yell. Once, her mother knocked on the door and asked if she was okay. Naima smiled through the crack. I'm just talking. Her mother nodded slowly, unsure, but said nothing. Because how do you explain to someone that your voice is a thing you have to build from scratch? That it doesn't always come with volume, but with permission. And for the first time in her life, Naima was starting to give herself that permission. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't share the recordings. She didn't raise her hand at meetings. Not yet. But her eyes had changed. Her silence now had weight. And in that quiet corner of room 3B, while others debated the world out loud, Naima was preparing to change it from the inside out. By week 3, it was official. Naima was the timekeeper. No title, no vote, no ceremony, just the unspoken decision everyone silently agreed on. The stopwatch was placed in front of her seat every session, and that was that. Start when they start. Stop when they stop, Jada said one day, as if it were nothing. And to everyone else, it was nothing. While the room lit up with energy, shouting, debating, snapping fingers in heated arguments, Naima pressed buttons. Tick, tock, repeat. But silence is not the same as stillness, and watching is not the same as waiting. Because while they argued, she studied. She watched how Jada tilted her head before hitting a point, how Marcus always took 3 steps to the right before his rebuttals, how Layla used silence, not to pause, but to create tension. Naima saw everything, and she didn't just memorize their words. She memorized their timing, their cadences, their flaws. She could already tell who would win a match before it began, based on body language alone. But still, she stayed quiet. Not because she had nothing to say, but because her voice wasn't ready to walk into that space yet. At home, the speeches grew longer, more precise. She started practicing real topics now: systemic injustice, representation, language, and identity. She didn't just repeat arguments, she crafted them, from scratch, from pain, from that day in the classroom when Mr. Dorsey made her silence feel like failure. But here, no one mocked her, because no one noticed her, and that was their mistake. One Thursday, the group was short a speaker. Marcus was sick. Layla had a family emergency. "Anyone want to fill in?" Jada asked. "We're down a partner for the mock round." Silence. All eyes flicked around the table, but none landed on Naima, not even Jada's. "Guess I'll go solo then," she said. Naima opened her mouth to volunteer, then closed it again. Not yet. Because she didn't want pity. She didn't want a handout. She wanted to be undeniable. And when her voice finally entered that room, it would not ask for space. It would take it. In debate club, Naima was the girl in the corner with the stopwatch. Week after week, she listened. They spoke. She counted. No one asked her to do more. On this particular Thursday, the mock debate was running late. 2 teams, some nervous energy, and 1 chair left empty. Marcus had called in sick. Jada was forced to go solo. She started strong as always. Her voice sharp, her posture steady, but mid-rebuttal, her throat caught. She paused, coughed once, swallowed, tried again. Nothing. For the first time in weeks, the room didn't know what to do. Jada looked around, searching for water she didn't bring. Her voice was gone. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was awkward, uneasy. From the back, someone whispered with a grin. "Well, guess she's not invincible." Naima heard it, every syllable. Not because it was loud, because it was familiar. She'd been the punchline in whispers too many times not to recognize the tone. She stood up. No one noticed at first. She wasn't someone people watched. But then a chair scraped. Eyes turned. Naima walked toward the front. Not quickly, not hesitantly either. She didn't ask for permission. She looked at the judges. Her hand wasn't shaking. "I'd like to finish the round," she said. One of the boys raised an eyebrow. Someone from the audience laughed, not mockingly, more out of disbelief. But Jada stepped aside, without a word, without a doubt. Naima unfolded a printout from the table. She didn't need most of it. She had memorized half the arguments weeks ago, sitting quietly in the back. She looked straight ahead. "When we talk about media bias," she began, "we pretend it's about headlines, about airtime, about statistics. But bias isn't always written in words. It lives in what we're taught to expect from the people speaking them." She didn't pause to see who was listening. She knew they were. "When someone like me walks up to this mic, most of you are already writing a story. You've decided what I know, what I don't, how loud I'll speak, and whether I'm worth listening to at all." She glanced at the girl who had whispered earlier. "I've heard those stories all my life. But here's what's different now. Today, I'm writing the next chapter, and I won't be needing your version anymore." There was no applause, only stillness. Naima didn't wait for approval. She placed the printout down, nodded once to the judges, and walked back to her chair. Nobody whispered after that. The debate team had never felt this full before. Every chair was taken, every name on the roster highlighted, every role accounted for, except one. The regional competition allowed a team of 6. 5 were confirmed. 1 seat remained. Jada brought it up at the start of the meeting. "We need to finalize our 6th, she said, flipping through her notes. "We're out of time." Naima sat at the edge of the circle, no longer invisible, but still outside the conversation. Her performance from last week hadn't been forgotten. On the contrary, people looked at her differently now. Some with curiosity, some with respect, some with something harder to name. Unease, maybe, or the beginning of envy. "I think we should vote," Marcus suggested. "We've got two options, right? Naima and Terrell." The room stiffened, not from the tension between the two candidates. Naima hadn't said a word since she arrived, but from the unspoken weight behind what this choice meant. Terrell was reliable, loud, polished. He'd been on the team longer. He'd never frozen in the middle of a round. He was safe. Naima was new and unforgettable. Someone cleared their throat. "I mean, no offense, but one speech doesn't make someone ready for regionals." Another chimed in. "Yeah, it was a great moment, sure, but that doesn't mean she can handle real pressure." Naima didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She just watched them as they justified a decision they hadn't made yet but already believed in. Jada looked at her. "Well, do you want the spot?" Naima could have hesitated. She could have smiled politely and said something diplomatic. She could have said she was fine waiting her turn. But she'd done all of that already. For years. "Yes," she said. The word was smooth, grounded, not loud, not shaky. Just true. "I've been practicing every day for 2 months. I've written and rewritten every possible rebuttal we could face in the first 2 rounds. I know what arguments Marcus leans on. I know how Terrell structures his closing statements. I know the timing, the pacing, the transitions. I don't just want the spot, I'm ready for it." Silence followed. Not awkward, not angry, just thoughtful. Jada looked around the room, then said, "We're not voting. We're choosing who gives us the best chance. And right now, I think we all know who that is." No one objected. Terrell leaned back, quietly nodding, and Naima, who had once begged herself to whisper, now stood holding a place no one could take from her. Not because they gave it, but because she claimed it. The regional competition was 3 days away. Practice sessions grew longer. Arguments sharper. Everyone was pushing harder than usual, but Naima could tell. Not all of them were pushing in the same direction. The tension wasn't overt. It lived inside comments, quiet tones, glances exchanged when she answered too confidently. Terrell kept his distance. Layla, once warm, now offered nothing but silence. And even Jada, though still supportive, had begun watching her with a different kind of intensity, like waiting to see if the spark would last or flicker out. After rehearsal one evening, as Naima packed up her notes, she heard it again. Another whisper, this time from the faculty lounge, drifting into the hallway as she passed. "Impressive moment, sure," a voice said. "Mr. Dorsey." But we all know what happens when they get too much attention. Cracks start to show. He was talking to another teacher. They both chuckled. Naima stopped. She didn't turn around, didn't correct him, didn't offer any proof that she had changed, because she knew something he didn't. She was never trying to impress him. What shook her once no longer reached her. In the days that followed, she focused harder, spoke cleaner, moved with a purpose that had no room left for doubt. Not theirs, not hers. She wasn't chasing approval anymore. She was carrying momentum. On the final team run-through, Jada handed her the anchor position, the last speaker of the final round. It was the highest pressure slot, the one that closed the match and made or broke the victory. No one objected, but she could feel it. Some didn't agree. She could see it in their eyes. If she stumbles, we'll say we knew it. If she doesn't, we'll say it was luck. Let them, she thought. The night before the competition, she stood in her bedroom, not rehearsing, not this time, but looking at her reflection. She didn't need to practice anymore. She already knew what she would say. She knew how it would sound. But more than that, she knew how she would feel. Not afraid, not shy, not small. There was nothing to fear anymore, because once you've spoken while the world is waiting for you to fail, and you don't, there's nothing they can take from you. The auditorium wasn't grand, but it was full. Students from a dozen schools filled the rows. Judges in tailored suits, pens ready, papers clipped, heads tilted with professional attention. The kind of room where you feel watched, even when no one's looking directly at you. Naima stood behind the podium, the fourth speaker in her team's final round. The topic, the cost of silence in modern society. The irony wasn't lost on her. She adjusted the mic. It was slightly too low. She didn't ask for help. She raised it herself, then looked up and spoke. When people talk about silence, she began, they usually picture stillness, peace, a kind of passive, noble restraint. But for people like me, silence isn't quiet. It's weight. The room didn't blink. For some of us, silence is what we're born into, taught to carry it early. In classrooms where raising your hand means taking a risk. In stores where asking a question means being watched. At dinner tables where our stories are cut short by other people's comfort. A few students in the audience straightened in their seats. One of the judges looked up from his notepad. My silence wasn't chosen. It was assumed, expected, rewarded even, as long as I stayed small. But silence doesn't protect you. It just makes it easier for people to erase you without feeling guilty. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't need volume. She had direction. I'm not here because I found my voice. I'm here because I stopped apologizing for having one. From the back of the room, a murmur of movement. Someone whispered something. She didn't turn. Every time I speak, I carry with me the memory of being told I was too quiet, too slow, too soft. I remember the laughter, the names, the teacher who told me to sit down because I wasn't ready to be heard. Now she looked out, calm, steady, not accusing, just exact. But I never needed them to hear me back then. I just needed to hear myself. She paused, not for effect, not for drama, but to let it land. And now that I have, I won't be silent again. She closed her folder, stepped back from the mic, and returned to her seat. The room didn't erupt in applause, not yet, but something had shifted. The silence she left behind wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of recognition. Naima hadn't expected anything after the speech. She didn't stand there waiting for validation. She wasn't hoping for applause. She had said what needed to be said, and that alone felt like winning. But some moments grow legs. Within an hour of leaving the auditorium, a clip of her speech, shaky, vertical, captured by a classmate's phone, was circulating across group chats and school forums. By midnight, it had passed the walls of her school. By morning, it had crossed the state. Who is this girl? Why is no one talking about this? I felt that in my bones. Teachers started sharing it in class. Local reporters reached out. Activist pages reposted it with captions like, "This is why we need to listen." Naima watched it all unfold from her bedroom. No makeup, no interview outfit. Just her, curled up in her hoodie, trying to understand what was happening. She didn't feel famous. She didn't feel heroic. She felt like herself, but louder. At school, things were different. People moved out of her way in the hallways, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Some smiled. Some didn't. Mr. Dorsey didn't say a word. He looked at her once at the lockers and quickly turned away. She didn't need more than that. One afternoon, a younger girl tapped her shoulder in the cafeteria. "I watched your speech with my mom," she said quietly. She cried. I didn't even know she cried. Naima smiled, said nothing. Sometimes, silence is finally yours to give. Weeks passed. The national debate invitation came. Naima's name was first on the list, but something else stayed with her more than trophies or headlines. She began writing, not to impress, not for school, just for herself. Her own thoughts, her own rhythm, her own voice. And one evening, sitting at her desk, she opened her old phone gallery. Hundreds of practice recordings stared back at her. Shaky hands, croaky voice, quivering eyes. She didn't delete them. She watched one, then another, then one more. In each, she saw a girl who was never weak, only waiting, Not for permission, not for applause, just for the right moment to become undeniable. Naima didn't just win a debate, she redefined what power looks like, and in doing so, she gave silence a new name: voice.